Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, no matter where you are, whenever you're watching this. This is Floating in Dreams. Today I'm going to be ranking all of my grungy eyeshadow palettes for you. Welcome to everybody watching today. Thank you so very much for joining me. Today's video is going to be me ranking all of my grungy toned eyeshadow palettes. And before we get to the ranking, I'm gonna have to tell you a little bit what I think a grungy eyeshadow palette is, and another couple of announcements, and then we'll get to the ranking. I have 50 to rank here, so that's quite a lot, so let's just get started. In case you're new here, hi, my name is Maaike. I live in the Netherlands. I like to come in here to chat about eyeshadow palettes, accessories, reviews, and getting the use out of my makeup. Plus, because I have fair skin with a cool to neutral undertone, I deem myself a snow angel. And if you would like to join the Snow Angel Club, then definitely hit subscribe down below and join my little family. So yeah, before we get into the ranking, I have to tell you what sort of parameters I used to determine whether something is a grungy palette or not, because as I was going through my makeup collection and like searching for eyeshadow palettes that I could feature in this video, I came across eyeshadow palettes that I've listed in other Color Story rankings. So in case you didn't see a lot of my videos that I was doing around this time last year, but actually at I think the second half of 2021 and a little bit at the start of this year, I did a ranking video every single month with all of the eyeshadow palettes in a given Color Story. And ranking all of my grungy toned eyeshadow palettes was part of the list to do as part of that series, but unfortunately due to some health issues, I wasn't able to film that video at the time, and by the time I was able to film that video, it was springtime, and I was like, am I going to be talking about grungy eyeshadow palettes when we're heading into nice weather? I didn't feel it was very appropriate, so that's why I sort of put that video on the back burner, but I still wanted to do it because grungy tones are some of my favorites. Granted, there is going to be a little bit of overlap here between some of my cool tones, my jewel tones, my rainbow color stories, because I feel that grunginess isn't necessarily a particular color story, it's sort of more of a vibe that a palette gives off. So when it comes to grungy tones, which I love, they have to be murky shades, they have to be dirty shades, you could say. Sometimes they can be jewel tones, sometimes they can be more neutral, sometimes they can be a little bit more smoky leaning. So I have a whole array here. I have 50 palettes, as I mentioned, and yeah, that's quite a lot to get to. So this is definitely going to be a longer video, so I hope you would like to grab a snack, something to drink, and then we're going to be chatting about these eyeshadow palettes. Now, before we get to this ranking, I have to mention an honorable mention because the original Color Story that was inside this palette was incredibly great for this video, but because there are already palettes that I'm going to be mentioning in this ranking, I actually ended up decluttering the shades that were in this originally, and I repressed some shades from another very grungy eyeshadow palette that were the only shades I wanted to keep from that palette into this. So you can buy this as is. What am I talking about? It's the Kaleidos Futurism 1. This was a very nice sort of like greenish gold, really murky Color Story originally that was really, really stunning. But I felt it was too similar to another very murky, grungy green Color Story that you'll see later on in the video. So I decided to not keep those shades around, but I love the Futurism packaging that Kaleidos did. I wish they came out with more of these in this line. I love a lot of the Color Stories that they did. This just wasn't perfect because I just owned something so similar to this one. So I broke up the shades out of the pans. These are magnetic, so you can take them out if you'd like to. And then I repressed, but I ended up repressing my 6 favorite shades from the Beauty Bay Wilderness palette in this. So the Beauty Bay Wilderness palette was another palette that was very hyped up. It had some really stunning grungy tones for sure, but I felt it combined a couple of the grungy toned eyeshadow palettes I'm going to be talking to you about today that I already owned. So it wasn't a must-have in my collection, but it had a couple of very stunning shimmer shades and a couple of really stunning murky greeny teal shades that I decided to pop in here because I felt these shades went really nicely with the way this, with the vibe of this eyeshadow palette. Granted, I haven't used these ever since I repressed them. That's definitely something that I still want to do. A lot of the Color Stories that I have been rearranging in recent years, I'm going to be sort of putting those to the test as well. But I'm going to be starting that series after I do this month of eyeshadow palette related videos. So yeah, the Kaleidos Futurism one and the Beauty Bay Wilderness palettes, really lovely palettes, but because they were very similar to things I already owned, I ended up decluttering those, but this way I keep getting, like, I get to keep the best of both worlds. And then we get to the actual ranking. Number 50, Essence Dancing Green eyeshadow palette. This, I feel, perhaps isn't super duper grungy to a lot of people, but I think if you have the right undertone or like the right kind of skin tone for this, it can look grungy if you put certain shades together. And that's sort of where the bottom part of this ranking goes to. A lot of the eyeshadow palettes that I'm featuring here have potential grungy elements, but the overall total vibe of the palette isn't necessarily all that grungy, if that makes sense. Like we're gonna get grungier and grungier and grungier as we go towards the top of this ranking. But yeah, Dancing Green looks like this. This is a really fun color story that is super affordable at the drugstore, and I really like how you have the option to go grungy green because of these two shades here. It's also a little bit more cool toned leaning. The only thing this palette really needed for it to be super grungy is, for instance, a shimmer instead of this very standard cream tone matte. We get them in every single palette, it seems, to really have a really good grungy shimmer in here as well. I feel that the shimmers is where this palette is a bit more muted down, but these two mattes are great if you want to do something a little bit more grungy. You can make this a bit more neutral, you can go full on green with this. So this is like a bit middle of the road perhaps. It's not super grungy, but because it is greens, and there's just something about a swampy green like this one here where I feel like instant grunge. So that's why I did want to mention this one here. Number 49 is one that I had to pull out of my collection because this is the Lowest Cosmetics Meet Me at the Underworld eyeshadow palette. And this color story, like, again, not all of it is super grungy, but it definitely has the potential to give you very grungy looks. Especially if you go with like the deeper berries, you get like the grunginess that you can get from the Modern Renaissance. But here you have those like swampy greens as well. You do get a nice really swampy green shimmer here too. So I feel you have the potential to do a very sort of swampy, greeny, grungy look, but you can then go very neutral with this. You just have a lot of options here, and that makes it a very nice palette. The reason why this is ranking at the bottom isn't just because it's not that grungy, but it also, in terms of formula, I felt was not the best eyeshadow palette I've ever worked with. These are very workable eyeshadows indeed, but I felt that the mattes were better than the shimmers. The shimmers were a little so-so, so that's why this also gets to be ranked a little bit further down. Essentially, this is decluttered from my collection, but because it has such stunning packaging, I decided to keep it around, plus a bit of Orpheus and Eurydice. Is that how you pronounce her name in English? I don't know. In Dutch we would say Eurydice. So yeah, that's definitely something that I just really appreciate. I love me some Greek mythology, so this is, and the color story is just super pretty and something I can definitely get down with. I just wasn't in love with the quality. Number 48, a brand we're gonna see a lot of, Melt. And this is their Beetlejuice Waiting Room palette. And the reason why this is not very high up in the ranking isn't because it isn't very grungy, but because it's very one note. It's reds and then grays. And the thing with this palette is that you can do a really nice grungy red look with the reds, and you can do a very grungy smoky look with the bottom row, but the rows don't really mix and match all that well. So in terms of versatility, I don't feel we get a lot, but I do really like this color story, which is why it's like still in my collection. And I definitely think it's a little bit more unique. However, we're gonna see some other cool tones with a pop of red in some of the other palettes that I've got going on. But yeah, this does have a very nice, more vibrant red shimmer here, which is a bit more unique. And on me, these darker shades definitely pulled a little bit more plum. But yeah, I wish there was more of a transition shade in here for me personally, which is why I'm ranking this a bit lower. Then a brand that isn't necessarily known for doing grungy color stories, but they actually have at least they used to, because these palettes have been long since discontinued. But the brand I'm mentioning here is Zoeva, and this is their Premier palette. Again, not a super grungy color story, but because it does have these like very desaturated, murky shimmers on this side of the palette, I feel it can definitely give you a more neutral grungy look, which is why I appreciate this palette and I've kept it around for such a long time. It has a pretty good like mauve tone matte, and it goes really well with this plummy shimmer here, and it has a stunning like blue brown kind of shade, which is really pretty, but it's like these like swampy, you're gonna hear swampy, murky, that's the vibe we're going for. And the Premier palette definitely has a couple of shades that give that, but because the entire palette doesn't give the vibe, it definitely ranked a little bit lower. Number 46, Urban Decay Naked Smoky. I told you there were going to be some smoky palettes in here, and this is, like the name says it all really. Again, a palette you can do smoky, grungy things with, but not necessarily. The reason why this has survived for such a long time in my makeup collection isn't just because it is a naked palette and I'm a bit of a naked aficionado, you could say, but because it has these blue tone grays, and I live for a blue tone gray smoky eye. My favorite kind of smoky eye is a navy grayish one. That's my smoky eye. Not grays with blacks, but grays with a navy, and especially if the grays already have this blue saturated undertone to it, I love it even more, and this palette gives me just that, and that's what I still have this palette for. The rest is perhaps a little bit more boring and neutral. It is a naked palette after all, so not a super grungy color story, but in terms of a naked palette and a neutral palette that can give you a bit of grunge if you'd like to, it is a good one, which is why I'm ranking it here. 45 then is the Jaclyn Hill and Morphe Vault eyeshadow palette. This is Dark Magic. This is the only Morphe palette I still have. I've only ever purchased this Vault from Morphe. I never fell for the hype of the other palettes they ever sold. This is a great cool toned color story, but because it has some desaturated, swampy jewel tones, like this tealy shade is really, really lovely. You get that swampy, murky green that I love, but you also get some forest green, some taupes. You can do a cool tone neutral look with this, but you can also make it more grungy and just yummy. So that's why this is a good grungy one. I don't think this is still available, and it is Morphe after all, and it's just not one of my favorite brands. I feel the quality is okay, but it's not something to write home about. We're gonna come across eyeshadow palettes with far better quality than this later in this ranking, which is why it's ranked here. Then number 44. Another more neutral tone palette that has a grunge element to it. Lorac Pro 2. This is one that was on my chopping block when I last decluttered my eyeshadow palette collection in the springtime. That's when I do my declutters. And I feel that especially this side of the palette, it can pull a little bit more grungy, especially because of that jade shade. And that's the reason why I have such a hard time letting go of this. It's also very light at the same time. So I feel we go very dark, very light, and there's very little to bridge the gaps between the very dark and the very light shades. So I really feel I need some more shades to pull into this palette to really make it work. But the plum and the navy are some really lovely grungy shades here as well. You do get some like dark gray shades. That jade shade, as I already mentioned, is really lovely. So yeah, the Pro 2 is just, it's a lovely palette. I really appreciate the formula. I don't reach for this a whole lot anymore, which is why it's down here. Then another, well, neutral-ish color story, especially if you have a deep skin tone. Jackie Aina from ABH. This palette is very grungy on me though, so if you have a deep skin tone, this will probably not be very grungy on you, but for me, especially this shade, these shades over here, because of that bluish green, brown sort of like duochrome that it has, this can look very grungy on me indeed. Granted, it does have the pinks and the purple, so it's not a full-on grungy eyeshadow palette, I feel, but it has the option for you to go a little bit more grungy, especially because of that taupe shade in here. Like these 4 shades on this side of the palette, like that quad, is one of my favorites in this entire eyeshadow palette. And I reach for that from time to time as well. So that's why I did want to mention it here, but because it isn't fully grunge, I decided to rank it at the lower end. Number 42, Similar vibe here. Sigma Enchanted has some grunginess, but it's also quite light and a bit rosy toned. So we get a lot of rosy purpley things going on over here, but then we get these yummy, deep, saturated, murky shades. And one of my favorite looks with this palette is these two greens with that gold, because this gold does have a bit of a green undertone to it, and then I do like a gold usually if it's a bit more murky. And also here you do get some murkiness in those browns. It goes really lovely with that Metamorphosis shade. So this has the potential to be grungy, but it doesn't have to be grungy. Again, you can make this neutral, you can make it very soft, ethereal, and pretty, because you have these like iridescent sparkly shades down here. You can go full on murky grunginess if you'd like to as well. So I really appreciate the palette, but we're gonna have lots more grungy goodness coming your way, so that's why this is in the number 42 spot. And number 41, another Zoeva palette. This is the Eclectic Eyes palette. This was only around for a hot minute, but can we just take a minute to appreciate this quad? Again, a neutral palette with some murkiness. So it doesn't have, again, the full-on grunge that I want my grunge palettes to have, but this does have the, you have the ability to do a very soft, neutral, everyday look, pull in some of the grungy shades. Now, granted, not all of these shades are created equal, because this one looks really interesting in the pen, but I've never been able to make it show up like that. It's like a blackened base with a teal shimmer and a blue sparkle. The blue sparkle just disappears the minute you stick a brush in, and the tealiness of this shade doesn't really capture the light unless you really just really dab it onto the lid and really make it go on opaque. You're able to do that, but on my fair skin, it just makes it look like I was punched in the face, so that's not a look I like to do with this. And as a liner or deepening up shade, it just has that sparkle, so it's not perfect for that. But this murky sort of like duck egg blue kind of shade, but like with a lot of gray running through it, is really pretty. And these two shimmers are very, very outstanding indeed. These are some stunning shades, but again, not a fully grunge color story, which is why it's in the bottom half. Moving on to the second category, and here we still have a couple of color stories that can be a little bit neutral / grungy at the same time, but we're definitely heading into more of the grungy jewel tones here too. But also got some smoky things in here. So number 40 is the Melt Cosmetics Smoke Sessions palette. So there's a lot of Melt in this video, because if there's a brand that does a good grungy color story, it is Melt. So the Smoke Sessions, mine is a bit fragile because this one came a little bit broken, so I have to lay it down flat. I keep all of my Melt shadows laying down flat for that reason, so they can't get any more damaged. This is a grungy color story, but we do get a little bit of brightness towards the end. So for me, the grunginess is definitely here, like this shimmer. And then like these, they're just really, really grungy saturated shades. Really lovely, but this is just not a standalone palette for me. So that's why I only ever use this in conjunction with other things. And that's why I feel it has to be ranked a little bit lower down, because it's just not perfect that way. And I feel quite similarly about this one. Number 39 is the Melt Blueprint palette. So the Blueprint has neutrals, but for me, these are quite grungy neutrals because they're very bronze heavy. So on me, this is going to look very sultry and glam, almost a bit like steampunk kind of vibes. That's also what the packaging kind of gives me, so maybe that's why it's like that in my brain. And you just get some brighter blues, but especially these two blues can really work well if you want to do some sort of like navy smoky eye. Granted, these navies aren't super deep, but sometimes it's good to have a bit of a brighter shade. For instance, if you were to use those gray tones from the Naked palette and like this matte and that for a bit of extra brightness, they can just have a bit more fun with it. So that's why I didn't want to mention the Blueprint here, but it's not a favorite grunge tone palette for sure. And if you saw my top 10 summer palettes video that I did in July, then you will have seen that I love warm tones with a pop of teal. And one of my favorite palettes for that is the Game Beauty Victory palette. But I also feel that this does, even though again, it's got some neutrals, You can do a grungy look with this because of how murky, saturated these shades are. We get a mustard up here, which I feel just adds to the more grungy vibes of this. However, it is warm tone neutrals with a pop of teal, so it's not going to give you something super grungy, but in terms of grunginess, it is a very good option if you're going for that warm tone with a teal kind of look. Lovely little palette, but not something that I need to rank very high. Number 37, the Nabla Cutie Platinum palette. I decided to put a couple of my Nabla Cutie palettes in here as well, because even though this perhaps looks like boring cool tone neutrals to most people, I feel that because we get that brassy gold and also these reddish tone browns, that it definitely has the potential to be more grungy if you so wish to. This is not like boring cool tone neutrals. You can take this a little bit more, again, in this like steampunk kind of direction if you'd like to. You can make this a little bit more smoky and saturated, especially because this shimmer, the silver, like this charcoal gray shimmer, isn't super duper bright. We get a very bright silver, but this murky saturated gray tone is going to give this the grunginess that you need to do a full-on grungy look if you so want to. So it really depends on how you put these shades together, how grungy it's going to be. If you focus on the deeper ones and that gold, I think it can make for a very stunning grungy look. Number 36 is the Millennial Pinks from Melt Cosmetics. Now this is quite a bright color story, so you're probably wondering, why is this a grungy color story for you? It's because of those grayish blues that we get on the end. So this I feel is a bit more unique than the Naked palette because that just has brown tone neutrals to go with it, but this has those pinks. And I think that this can make for a very soft, rosy, pretty Valentine's Day kind of look, or you can pull in these really intense shades and really make for a stunning grungy look. So I feel that this is a bit more unique than some of the other more like neutral color stories with a pop of something grungy, but this one I feel just has that bit extra to it. 35 then. We also need to mention Unearthly Cosmetics. I still have a palette here where they were called Alien Cosmetics. This is their Poison Apple. When I bought it, it was called the Serendipity. So the artwork is still the same, save for the gold packaging, and it now comes with square pans, but they still do the color story. And I just think this is such a fun, grungy, yummy thing, depending again how you put things together. You get some brightness here, but especially these like greens with the brown, and then that shimmer in the middle, and also this duochrome shade. You can make this very, very grungy indeed, if you so wish to. Again, not a perfect grungy palette, but it definitely has potential, which is why I'm ranking it here. Now, perhaps a brand that's a little unexpected in terms of grunginess. Catrice? Oh yes, their Pro Slim Vintage Soul palette. Sadly discontinued as far as I know, but this, like, come on. Those burgundies with the grays, I mean, again, it's super light here, but I again feel like the Millennial Pinks that this is a little bit more unique than some of the other things I already mentioned, and this has just the loveliest color story that Catrice has ever done. These two have a bit of a green undertone, which is also quite special, and this just looks really, really lovely. Perhaps more so this side of the palette rather than this side of the palette, but in terms of a grungy color story that can give you a neutral look as well as something grungy, I think this is a nice one. Number 33, another Melt palette. We've got a lot of Melt palettes here because I feel that all of their color stories have the potential to be grungy, but some of them don't have to be. And the She's in Parties is definitely that. I think if you have a deeper skin tone, this is not going to be super grungy on you. Or if you're very warm toned, however, on me, this is grungy mauve tones. That's the only way I can describe this palette for me. Yes, it is very light here, but these are all quite murky and quite deep, which is why on my fair skin, this does look quite grungy. I'm sure it doesn't do that for everyone, but that's the way it pulls on me. Number 32, another Unearthly Cosmetics eyeshadow palette. This can be neutral, this can be grungy, this can be colorful, depending on how you put shades together, but I just feel that there's just something about the way these shades are saturated, especially the shimmers, that this can be a little bit more of like a vibrant grungy. vibe, if that makes any sense. I'm not entirely sure. Again, because this isn't like a perfect grunge, I do feel that this does deserve a ranking a little bit lower in like the bottom half of the ranking, but I feel that especially this plum shade just, it's really, really stunning. And I also feel that those two pink shades, even though they look very bright in the pan, depending on how you play around with them, I think they can really murky up other shades that you have to play around with in this palette. So Allure from Unearthly Cosmetics is definitely a good one if you like brightness, if you like neutrals, as well as something colorful, but also something grungy. And last in this part of the ranking, number 31, we have the Prism from ABH. So this is of course a palette you can no longer buy, but I feel that this is one of the more grungy color stories they did. Granted, we get quite a lot of lighter shades here as well, and those are actually some of my favorites, but this green and then that purpley blue combined with the neon, I mean, come on. It's got some really nice, like, murky, grungy looking bronzes here too. So I feel that the Prism has a little bit of everything. Of course, this is sort of like a companion palette, but that palette is still gonna show up later because the palette that came right before this, I feel is much more grungy than this one. But yeah, the ABH Prism one is good, discontinued, and that's why I'm ranking it here. On to the third part of this ranking, which is number 30 till 21, and then we're gonna head into the top 20. So we're gonna break even in this part of the ranking. Number 30 is going to be the Beauty Bay Opulence palette, Age of Opulence, I believe it's called. I dislike the packaging of this so much that it doesn't, it knocks down a few points because of that. But the color story is jewel tone, but we get some grunge. I feel it's perhaps a little bit too bright for my liking for it to be a true, like grungy palette, but we do get some depth over here and also this like greeny teal. So you can make this grungy if you'd like to, but I don't feel it's the most grungy option that we have here. That's why it's still in like the bottom half of the ranking as well. Again, another palette that I feel very similarly about, but that I feel has much better quality. Number 29 is the e.l.f. Earth and Ocean palette. So the reason why I feel this is a little bit grungy is because we do get like this murky row here, like these three shades just make it a little bit more murky and grungy. Also this grayish tone blue. I feel that blues and greens can very easily be a little bit more murky and grungy, which is why I like this color story. Yes, we do get a lot of brightness here as well, some very light blues. So is this a true grungy color story? No, but I feel that at a drugstore price point, it is one of the best palettes that can give you a grungy look, which is why I wanted to rank it here. We also have quite a few smoky options in today's video, and I have quite a few in this little stack here right now. Number 28 is the Dose of Colors Smoky Soiree palette. So this is a smoky eye palette. It is sort of like Melt Waiting Room, grays with reddish tones. However, I felt that this reddish tone and also this brown were a little bit warm toned. However, I feel that in terms of quality, this is one of the best Dose of Colors palettes I've ever tried. That shimmer is absolutely stunning, and you can make this a very smoky look if you want to, but you don't have to. So again, something a little bit of everything here. It's not a super stark red, so it's a good one to sort of dip your toe in. You can go full on grungy with this, but you don't have to. And I feel very similarly about the Dior Black Knights limited edition quintet that was released a few years ago. This was limited edition for Christmas, but this I feel is better on the grunge because we get a grungy navy, a grungy charcoal, a grungy burgundy, a grungy black with shimmer, and a silver. And also the silver isn't like a very stark silver. It's definitely got this like murky quality to it as well. So that's why I prefer this a little bit better. It's like the Melt Waiting Room, grays with something red, but I feel this all goes together and the look you're gonna get is this very grungy, dark kind of palette. I think this is a really good one. And I wish you could still get this, then this might have ranked higher. The quality of the Dior palettes is more of a buildable quality, so this isn't like boom pigment and you're done kind of quality either, which is why I feel a lot of people didn't love this, but I think it's a good one if you want to dip your toes into a smoky eye palette, but you don't want it to be too crazy with tons of fallout straight away. Number 26 is a palette that I wanted to be more grungy, which is why I'm ranking it in the bottom half here. The Quintessence from Sydney Grace and Temptalia. So this was part of their collab that they did last year. And this is a really pretty palette, and when you look at this, it looks really grungy. Granted, I did get the dark version for these two shades. There is a lighter version and then it's a little less grungy. I really appreciate the teal we get here, but I feel that the shimmer options in here is what skew it a little less grungy. I wish that some of these greens, for instance, were a little murkier, a little bit more muted. They are just a little bit more on the grassy side. Same with this like purpley blue shade. If that had more gray running to it, or perhaps even more of a brown quality, I think this could have been a very stunning, very grungy palette. I love the formula. The shimmers by Sydney Grace are good. So this has grungy potential, but not quite that grungy, so that's why it's getting ranked here. And then number 25, the palette that's going to split this ranking in half, the Huda Beauty Wild Jaguar palette. This is quite possibly one of the best smoky eye palettes that has been released in recent years. Granted, it does have a black as the deepest shade. It would have been better for me if it had a dark brown, and I also don't know what we're supposed to do with this like creamy peachy shade. Not my vibe. But the shimmers in here, yes. Especially this one, this greenish, grayish with like the black specks. Really stunning. And then for instance, combining this gray with that purple is absolutely like this. With that in the crease, that, and then that brown. These are the only two shades, perhaps the gold that I don't love. But this is a really, really good murky palette that just works. A palette that I thought also brought a little bit of the grunge is the ColourPop Mandalorian. Now, the Mandalorian palette that I have here, this is the Child palette, doesn't have all its original shades anymore because I did pop out a few of the boring browns like this one, and this one, I believe I popped out. Those are some shades from the Just My Luck. So I actually made this more of a grungy green palette than it originally used to be, but I love the way this color story came together, and now it's a fully grungy green color story, and I like it with a pop of lime because I can. But I feel a palette that already came grungy green with a few brights, the W. Zielone, I'm not sure, it's green in Polish. I believe it's discontinued though. This is from Glam Shop. Glam Shop has been discontinuing a lot of their 9pan palettes, but this and then that shimmer. Like I've been critiquing a lot of palettes for having too bright shimmers, but here, like even that gold leaning shade has this really rich green undertone. I feel like the only two shades that make this not that grungy is these two. I feel like a bright, like limey neon yellowy green can still be a very murky shade, especially if you were to blend it with this. So I think this, even though it's very bright, can still be a murky one. I feel like the only two shades here that are, like, look at that. That's just stunning. So yeah, that's why this is in the number 23 spot. Number 22, It's Freakin' Bats by Betty Bean and Shroud Cosmetics. At the time this palette was made, Betty Bean was still known under the name Beaut Bean. She's changed her name by now, but I still have the old packaging. This is a really, really cool grungy color story. It's just that I don't love the way the shades pull together once I put it on my eyes. Some of the shades that seemingly go together in the mattes and the shimmers, I feel aren't the best pairings, which is why this is not in my top 20. But I feel it is a great grungy, all grungy color story, which is why it has to go into the higher part of this ranking for sure. And then we have Baroque from ColourPop. This is a great cool tone color story, but look at how... I think for me, grungy tones is just about how saturated they are, and these are like very pigmented, but the colors are just very muted down. Give me palettes like this any time of the week and I'm gonna be a happy bunny. This like really stunning murky navy and then this plummy leaning shade. This is great. This is one of the very few ColourPop color stories that I didn't pull apart and rearrange for my own purposes. It's just stunning, and these shimmers as well. So stunning. I don't know if you can still get this. If you can, it's a really good one. It is time for the top 20. Whoop, whoop. So we have number 20, Nabla Cutie Analog. You're probably wondering, Micah, is that grungy? I don't know about you, but warm tones can be grungy, especially if they have this like sepia, desaturated like photographs from the 70s kind of vibe to it. Like these ready tones, like whenever I would just remember going through pictures that my grandparents used to have from the 70s and they all look like this. So that's sort of where this comes from. These dark shades is what make it grungy. You can do very like vibrant orange, like boom, like vibrant orange if you'd like to, but you don't have to. And you can pull this into a more grungy vibe. And I think that that's why I really, A, like this palette, and 2, why it needs to go into the number 20 spot. Number 19, Lunar Beauty Eternal Eclipse. One of my favorite cool tone palettes that isn't super cool toned, which is why I feel it does fit a more grungy vibe. That gold, I mean, I don't love golds, but if it's a gold like this with a green undertone, I feel I can really murky it up and it just works a lot better as a gold for me. So you can use those warm tones, but of course this entire bottom row works really well. I love the quality of this. Can you do a neutral look with it? Yes, but that's not what I use this palette for. If I use it, I'm gonna go for those grungy, saturated navies and gray tones that it has, because that's what this palette is calling out for. Number 18 then is going to be the Venus Immortalis from Lime Crime. Also discontinued, I believe, but I think the Lime Crime website still stocks this. I don't know, things seem to be going out of stock at retailers with Lime Crime, but then on their official websites, things just seem to be available for like until the end of days, it seems. But this is a really nice, cool tone color story that, again, very grungy with those 2 darker shades here. I feel this shimmer over here is not that dark. The only thing this needed to be more grungy is a deeper transition shade. Like everything you get is fairly light. Of course you can use the black to deepen things up if you'd like to, but that's just not the way I live my life. So this cue's perhaps a little bit light, but especially the shimmers is just what make this a grungy dream. Next up is one of my favorite jewel tone palettes and a limited edition eyeshadow palette that I have kept in my collection because it's just that good. The Urban Decay After Dark, anyone? This was supposed to be the murky, grungy version of the Electric. They used to like be a pairing, at least in the brains of the people at Urban Decay. Again, this top row, maybe not so grungy, but these jewel tones at the bottom, you get Lounge, that's what it's called. I always forget what the name was. But Lounge was Urban Decay's answer to Max Blue Brown. So that's what's in here as well. You get some really like murky teals in here. Maybe not the most grungy color story. You can have jewel tones that are a bit more saturated, or I should say desaturated, but it's definitely not the most vibrant jewel tone palette I have. And then a palette that is quite new to me, but that I didn't want to forget mentioning here, the Ninhydrin from Adept Cosmetics. So the Ninhydrin does have 2 mattes. Both of them are nice murky shades. Can we just take a minute? Like, especially in this bottom row, yes, we get some bright shades, but there's also quite a lot of murkiness. Like this blue seems pretty bright in the viewfinder, but then when you turn the palette, like there is just a little bit of a brownish undertone to it. Same for the green. This gold has that green undertone that I love for a grungy gold. This peachy shade is more of like a rose gold as well. So yes, we get a couple of bright shades, but I feel that that kind of adds to the palette. And I just think this is a really good one if you want a, let's say, more updated grungy color story that has more jewel tones. Number 15 then, we're at the top 15, Coco Sanka from Glam Shop. Another one of those 9 pans that they seem to be discontinuing. Last time I looked on their website, this was still for sale, but apparently it's been announced that when they run out of stock, these are going to be gone. But yeah, it's a cool tone color story. It's quite similar to the That's Taupe from ColourPop, but I feel that this is just deeper, grungier, that shade in the middle. That's what makes this a grunge palette for me. Yes, we get some light shades, but that means you can make it a very neutral look, but you don't have to. This really deep, saturated, cool tone brown is life. We get this bronzy leaning shade. I mean, it's incredibly great, and the shimmer formula in this is stunning. Number 14, Club Nebula from Kaleidos. Sadly discontinued. This was their collab with Angelica, and this is just, again, maybe not all the shades. It is a bit light, but this half of the palette and that like limey chartreuse kind of shade that you get in the middle, very grungy, really stunning. You can do some really stunning looks with it. It kind of does it for you because each row can be used as a look, I would say, but you can also like work with it in like more like quads, so it does work quite well. And if you just stick to these really rich tones, you're gonna get a smoky, grungy look every single time, but it's a bit more colorful. And then we have some bigger palettes. Nomad Cosmetics Haunted Europe. Yes, I keep the outer box because I really like the castle with the bats on the front. I just do. I have a thing, like Dracula is one of my favorite all-time books, okay? So we have that, and then I'm not sure if you can see this. If I can show, oh, there we go. So we have the lady in the picture, and then we have the veil. It's really stunning. This is also, again, quite bright, quite colorful, but you get a lot of really murky, grungy shades that just aren't that saturated. Very lovely formula. It's a bit thin. It takes, I feel the Nomad Cosmetics formula is one I really have to get used to, which is why this is not in the top 10, but this is just a really good grungy color story indeed. A more recent pick, number 12, Surge from Blend Bunny Cosmetics. So this I tried out just in July, so this is quite hot off the press, and again, we get some really vibrant neons in here, but I love how these are all very desaturated, murky, lovely, grungy shade. If you love a grungy rainbow, this is definitely one of the picks I would go for. It just has some really, really stunning shades. You can do some really good looks with it. I wish it had some more shimmers, especially here in the lighter end of the spectrum. That would have worked a bit better for me personally. That being said, it is a great one, so that's why it's just falling outside of the top 10, but I did really like this one. And another one, this may surprise some people actually, but just outside of the top 10, Melt Gemini. I love this thing to bits, but it's got a lot of warm tones, which aren't my favorite. But yeah, you get your murky, mustard-leaning warm tones and then your green. So the smoke sessions that I showed you earlier, I like pulling into this just to get a little bit more versatility out of this palette because you only get 2 shimmers in here and they aren't perfect for me personally. Especially that Lorelei shade. No, this is the Gemini shade. That's Lorelei. Gemini. That's the shade I just don't love. But yeah, this is a great little palette. Really nice murky shades. Especially this shade. This side of the palette, of course. But yeah, this just makes for a really nice grungy neutral look on me anyways. Because I have fair skin. So yeah. Melt does some really lovely grungy tone palettes. But I was like, can I put 3 Melt palettes in my top 10? And I felt that wasn't right. We still have 2 coming. Don't worry, don't worry. Time for the top 10. Number 10, this guy from Viseart. Viseart does very neutral things. This is their Paris Étoile from the Petite Pro line. But can we just look at that for a minute? Like, yes, it's got quite a lot of light shades for only 8 pans, but 2 of those are shimmers, which I love. So you just get one lighter neutral to sort of tone down some of the mattes that you can use it to blend the other things out with, so that if you find that it looks too much like you're punched in the face, you can tone it down. But everything else, like that teal, so lovely. You get some really nice grungy grays in here, then those murky purples. It doesn't, like for a grungy, cool tone color story that is a smoky eye palette, without it being just blacks and grays, I think this is excellent, and this really surprised me, so that's why I do like this, and it's got the cutest little packaging as well, so number 10 for sure. Now an OG color story that I still love till this day, number 9, the Nomad from Juvia's Place. And this, I've ranked higher than a Gemini because in terms of like grungy, murky greens, I feel this is a bit murkier, like these 3 shades and that shade in the middle. Yes, it's very vibrant, but I feel that I can like make for a really good halo eye with that like olivey green. And also like these 3 aren't super duper saturated. You get some yellows in here that I feel could have been a little bit more mustard to make this even more perfect. But in terms of what this gives me, I feel this works a bit better on me than a Melt Gemini because these aren't like so dark and the neutrals aren't so warm toned that it doesn't work for me anymore. And I feel I can get similar looks out of this, which is why I've ranked this just a little bit higher at number 9. Number 8, Pat McGrath, the Look Squat. What is this thing called? Celestial Divinity Look Squat in Interstellar Icon. Hello. Yes, we get a lighter, brighter shade, but these three, when I played around with this, this was the one that when these launched, I thought I wasn't going to get. And then I tried it and I was like, ooh, this is my favorite one of the 3 that came out that year. It's really lovely, grungy vibes. This is just really, really good. This burgundy shade though, does have a bit of a something to it. It's not a full-on matte, but it does blend out really nicely. So it makes for a good crease shade, and everything here is just lovely to create a simple, grungy look. I mean, now that I look at this, I just want to put this all over the lid and just be done. Like, you can do that too. So this is a great, even though it's only 4 shades, you can do quite a lot with it. And that's what I appreciate in a palette. So Pat McGrath, Interstellar Icon is a good grungy tone palette. Number 7 then is Unearthly Cosmetics Fall Magic. Another palette I only tried in July, but I got it because I was like, that is going to be a really pretty fall time color story. And I don't know about you, but fall color stories are usually the best in terms of grunginess, because then we get Halloween, we get all the scary things, we get to turning leaves, and this palette is very much that turning leaves kind of vibe. Yes, we get something a bit more vibrant, this like tealy turquoisey blue, but it's got a bit of a purple undertone to it. It's really interesting. We also get a more vibrant purple in here, but everything else in here has that desaturated murkiness to it, especially in the matte tones, that I just love. Number 6 isn't just a grungy palette because of the color story, and when you see this, you're gonna think it's not that grungy, but trust me, this is a grungy rainbow color story. I showed it in another video recently talking about how much I love the packaging of the LA Splash Classic Horror Palette. Are you ready? Because the grunginess isn't just the color story here. Oh, that's so good. It's even on the back. It's got zombie ladies. It's very steampunk inspired. And then we get this as a color story. Now this looks like a very bright rainbow in the pan. I have found, however, that when you blend these out, they all have a murky, dark, very desaturated undertone to them. So it's really when you use these on the eyes that you're gonna see how murky and grungy these look. So while this may seem like another mid-tone bright rainbow color story, especially because of that shade and that yellow, but just look at like this, it doesn't have a full-on orange. Instead of it has this murky sunflower yellow with a lot of brown running through it. It's got a bright red, but then it has this berry red that has a very blackened undertone. This pink isn't your bright hot fuchsia. It has a more berry vibe to it. This purple is a bit more muted. You get a dark black, which mine has a bit of Harpan, sadly. You get this very desaturated blue shade and also the green. I feel that the shades in this palette are sort of like more like the shades that you get on the front of the packaging once you start applying it. Yes, they have a bit more vibrancy to it, but they make for like this really murky, and that's why I think it's called the Classic Horror Palette as well. Like, these are the kind of shades that you would use to do zombie makeup. Like, that's what you would use this for, really. So everything has this very murky, dark undertone, and that's why I like this one. Top 5 time. Here we go. Subculture by ABH is number 5. I know this palette is no longer around. Everybody hated it. I like mine. I'm not gonna lie. I like my ABH Subculture. And I mean, in terms of grungy color stories, it just doesn't have the grungy shimmers that I'd like. Like, it doesn't have any of those. We only get 3. We get this like toppery thing. I only like this greeny one really, and then that bronze. What I use this for, however, in the fall time, using these mattes and then a multi-chrome with it, Stunning. So yeah, this is a palette I still hold near and dear to my heart. I have bought other Color Stories since then that kind of dupe the vibes of this, but I'm going to be doing a video with that over the fall time where I'm going to talk about 3, maybe 4 palettes that have a similar color story to this and sort of like compare them and see what's going on there. So yeah, that's a video concept I'm still working on, but I don't have all the palettes that I want to compare in like here yet. So I hope it's going to come in soon. But yeah, this is the ABH Subculture, really nice grungy fall time color story indeed. But if you like your grungy jewel tones and you like your grungy shimmers, the number 4 is the Shroud Arcana palette, and it just doesn't get any better than this in terms of like grungy, especially the shimmers. That green, I keep going on about that green. That dark green matte, are you for real? That purple is like the perfect murky purple. We get teals in here. And then that murky transition shade is really lovely too. Then we get those warm tones over here. The gold here again has that murky green undertone that I love so much. So a go-to look for me in this palette. This in the crease, this in the outer V, this on the lower lash line, that all over the lid, that in the inner corner, and I'm done. Or maybe something super neutral with these 3 shades. I can go full on warm toned. I can use the teal with the blue, or maybe the teal with the greens. So many options, great versatility, great formula as well, and I can use my It's Freakin' Backs together with this to get a bit more versatility out of that palette, and then it does work for me a lot better. Number 3, a brand nobody talks about anymore, but they're still around as far as I know. Michel Lou Cosmetics Witchcraft. Can you get any more grungy than this? It's got reddish toned browns, we get plums, we get greens, but everything has been toned down a notch. Like this is grunginess. This just is. It like takes all the elements of some of the palettes I've shown you up to this point and they've thrown it together. You get some really good murky shimmers in here as well, especially that magic shades. I swatch it for you every year when I do my eyeshadow palette collection video, so you can see swatches of this. I think I have swatches and looks up at all of these. If I've tried them, I have a review, either on the channel or on the blog. Like I've got reviews for these for sure. These murky greens are lovely. These plums are just so rich and saturated. Yes, it's quite a deep palette, but I feel that even with my fair skin, I can make it work. And I wish more people would be talking about this brand again. They got a bit of traction when they first launched and they were sending out a lot of PR. And that's when people were talking about them, but then everybody stopped. And I'm like, hello, this is one of the best color stories ever. And nobody talks about it anymore. Now, for the top 2, can you guess? I've mentioned this brand a couple of times, but I already mentioned the king of all things grungy palettes, Melt. And the Mary Jane is one of my favorite smoky palettes. This is absolutely stunning. Yes, the shimmers are flaky and a bit messy to use, but this is such a good, cool tone, murky color story. And the reason why this gets to be number 2 is because it has these green undertones, then it has these like murky gray tones that aren't like your standard gray. They have a very brown undertone, so they're more of like a taupe leaning thing. And then you do get a bit of warmth over here, but what this has is, despite this being a very dark, grungy color story, I get 2 transition shades, matte transitions that I can use even though I'm super fair. We get 2 toppers or inner corner highlights. I wouldn't try using these 2 by itself all over the lid. They're just not made for that. But that's one of the things I love about this palette, because those topper shades are great to top over the other shimmers that this palette has, to tone it down and to give you that grungy, nice, smoky, yummy look. I love working with this palette. It is really, really stunning. And you can do a gray tone look with this, you can do a taupey look with this, you can do very smoky, but everything is going to be grungy for sure. And Melt Cosmetics just does it every single time. And this is a great grungy tone color story. I can't fault it. But the OG grungy color story that they did bring back for a hot minute this summer. It was back for a minute. I hope they're gonna do a restock again. But the Muerte, this is not neutral. It's got some bright shades, but this, oh my word, this is such a good like grungy color story. This is really, really lovely. Is it my favorite Mel palette? I don't think so, but in terms of grunginess, I don't think anything has ever been able to top this for me, and that's why I'm really glad that they brought it back for a hot minute over the summertime. If it does come back in stock and you were umming and ahhing about this one, I feel it's worth the money. I just think it is. I think I did buy mine when it launched, so I think at the time they were a little bit less expensive, and I got mine off of Beauty Bay, I believe with a discount code as well, so I definitely didn't pay full price for this one. You get the vibrant red, which is not my favorite, but I love how these reds, those were the shades that really scared me when I got this in. But those reds have a plum undertone. It works really well. I just wish it didn't have that yellow tone. Like, if this were the palette, I would have been a lot happier. But yeah, I love these like murky teals that it has. The turquoises can brighten it up. We get some of my favorite navies are in here. Like that navy shimmer. We get this like deep, it looks gray in the pan, but it actually has a blue undertone as well. So this is just one of the best ones. And I love, again, how you get like the actual colors inside are in the packaging. I love that. So yeah, Melt Muerte, best grungy color story for me, most definitely. So now I need to put all of these things back into my makeup collection. Oh, I hope it all goes well, that I don't drop anything or anything like that. But if you'd like to see more of my eyeshadow palette collection, then definitely stay tuned, because I will be filming my entire eyeshadow palette collection for you towards the end of the month. So for now, thank you so very much for joining me. Give it a thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe to my channel if you'd like to see more by me. I make several videos a week. We're still in the midst of doing eyeshadow palette month, but we're nearing the end now. Really, really sad. But I've got some plans for the fall time. Once this month is over, I'm going to be starting some new eyeshadow palette series. So if you'd like to stay tuned for more, and then I hope to see you in my next video. Bye-bye!